Hello, everybody. David here. Welcome. Here we share true stories from real people. Today, starting out with the first story. My mother canceled my baby's shower behind my back because her golden daughter is getting a divorce, but I told everyone why her marriage is ending. I'm a 33-year-old woman, adopted by my parents after my birth mother abandoned me at a fire station when I was just born. My parents had tried for years to have a child, but despite all their efforts, they were unsuccessful. So they turned to adoption in the hope of filling the void in their hearts. My adoptive mother, whom I simply call Mom, would often tell me how she fell in love with me the moment she laid eyes on me. She said she felt an overwhelming love and knew immediately that I was her daughter. My parents worked tirelessly to bring me into their lives, and for that, I will forever be grateful. They went through endless paperwork, interviews, and home visits to ensure they could provide a safe and loving home for me. I can't imagine what my life would have been like in an orphanage if they hadn't adopted me. Not only did my adoptive parents give me a home, but they also saved my life in many ways. I was their first child, and for many years, I enjoyed their undivided attention and love. They showered me with affection and care throughout my childhood. However, unlike my parents, my maternal grandparents didn't want me. They constantly told my parents that adopting me was a huge mistake and refused to acknowledge or talk to me. Their coldness was evident and deeply hurtful, even though as a child I couldn't fully understand why they treated me that way. One particularly painful childhood memory was during Christmas. The entire family would go on holiday to my grandparents' cabin, where everyone exchanged gifts. It was a joyful and festive occasion, as it was my first time participating in the celebration. While everyone received gifts, my grandparents blatantly refused to give me anything. They insisted that I wasn't really part of the family, so they didn't feel obligated to give me anything. This led to a huge argument between my father and my grandparents. My father, angry and protective, chastised them for treating me differently from my cousins. He told them that I was part of their family because I was his and my mother's daughter, and their behavior toward me was unacceptable. Emotions ran high as he declared that he wouldn't participate in the celebration if they continued to exclude me. My mother, caught in the middle, tried to mediate. She asked my father to calm down, explaining that not everyone understood their decision to adopt. She tried to justify her parents' actions, saying they were old-fashioned, and begged my father not to take their words to heart. However, my father refused to back down. Since my mother wasn't willing to leave with him, he walked out with me. I remember feeling awful, even physically sick, thinking that somehow I was responsible for my parents' fight. Later, my father reassured me that it wasn't my fault, and that he loved me no matter what. However, the guilt lingered, mixed with the sadness of not being wanted by my grandparents. I wish I could say that over time, my grandparents' treatment of me improved, but unfortunately it didn't. Their coldness persisted, and my father, after seeing its impact on me, consciously limited contact with them for many years. He even stopped attending family functions altogether. My mother tried to bridge the gap, but my father never forgave my grandparents for treating me differently. Now, compared to my mother's side, my father's family was much more accepting and inclusive. From the beginning, they welcomed me with open arms, treating me as one of their own. My paternal cousins always accepted me without question, seeing me as a true member of the family. We shared countless holidays, birthdays, and family gatherings together. Even now, as adults, we still hang out and maintain close relationships. We travel together, celebrate milestones, and support each other through life's ups and downs. So, my life wasn't all that bad. I really enjoyed being my parents' only child for a long time. They always gave me everything I wanted and tried their best to make me feel cherished. Then, 7 years later, something incredible happened. Miraculously, my mother became pregnant with my sister. This news was completely unexpected, as my parents had lost all hope of having a biological child. My mother's pregnancy was like a blessing to everyone. While my parents and the rest of the family were thrilled about my mother's pregnancy, I couldn't help but feel a bit jealous and anxious. I feared that with a biological child on the way, their love and attention might drift away from me. This fear was exacerbated by knowing how my maternal grandparents viewed me, and I was afraid they might abandon me again. Luckily, my parents must have sensed my feelings, so they talked to me. They reassured me that I would always be their first daughter, no matter what. My mother also pointed out how now I would have a little sister to share my days with, which was exciting. After talking with them, I felt much better and was eager to meet my sister. The day Claire was born, our entire family was overjoyed. I remember the delight I felt seeing her for the first time. Everything about her, from her tiny fingers to her bright eyes, seemed incredibly adorable to me, and being a big sister added a new dimension to my life. We were extremely close during her early years. Claire followed me everywhere, and even sometimes tried to mimic everything I did. Of course, like any siblings, we occasionally fought, but I loved her too much to stay mad at her for long. However, the real problems between us began when my grandparents started telling Claire, as she grew older, that I wasn't her real sister. At first, my parents were unaware of this because they occasionally left Claire at her grandparents' house for visits. But after each visit, Claire's behavior toward me gradually changed. She became dismissive and rude to me for no apparent reason. If I wanted to play with her or spend time together, she would snap at me until I left her alone. My parents noticed this change and tried to talk to her, but Claire never gave them a reason. So, they assumed it was just a phase she was going through. But things only got worse between us as we grew up. One day, I came home from school and found all the clothes in my closet had holes in them. There were random holes of different sizes cut into all my clothes. I thought I was going crazy, and that this must have been a mistake because there was no way all my dresses could suddenly have holes. My first instinct was to call my mother, who was also shocked and confused. She suggested it might have been mice, but the number of holes in all my clothes overnight made that explanation unlikely. We were both puzzled by this strange situation. Then, a few days later, I encountered another odd incident. My contact lenses, which I had left on the table before showering, mysteriously disappeared. I searched everywhere but couldn't find them. With no spare contacts, I couldn't attend class that day. When I told my parents, they scolded me for being irresponsible, thinking I had misplaced them. I tried to explain that I would never do that, but they didn't believe me and chalked it up to my forgetfulness. However, things escalated when I walked into my room one day after school and found Claire messing with my lipsticks at my vanity. I was stunned and asked her what the hell she was doing in my room. Claire turned around, looking guilty. As I approached the vanity, my heart sank when I saw that my collection of lipsticks, which I had gathered over the years, was completely destroyed. Frustrated and furious, I couldn't help but scream in disbelief. My mother rushed into the room to see what had happened and was shocked to see my ruined lipsticks. She asked Claire about her actions, but Claire just said she was playing. I know this might seem normal between siblings, but I knew my sister well, and this wasn't her usual behavior. Up until that point, I had always trusted Claire. I never suspected my sister could act so maliciously. However, looking back at the past incidents and connecting the dots, it was clear she was responsible for cutting holes in my clothes and taking my contact lenses. I confronted her, demanding answers, wanting to understand why she had done these things. At first, my mother tried to defuse the situation, not believing that Claire could be behind this, but I couldn't let it go and kept pressing until Claire tearfully admitted that she had done all of it. Hearing this, my mother's face shifted to surprise and concern. She gently asked Claire why she would do something so destructive. Claire, with tears in her eyes, confessed. Our grandparents had filled her head with negative ideas, constantly reminding her that I was adopted and didn't really belong with them. They also made her jealous, suggesting that I was trying to take away her inheritance, and that our parents liked me more than her. The manipulation had caused Claire to develop resentment toward me over time. I felt a surge of anger as I listened to Claire's confession. It was infuriating because I had been silent about my grandparents' hostility toward me for so long. Now, seeing them manipulate Claire, I felt they had crossed a line. I knew that if my father found out what was happening, he would react strongly and might even cut off Claire's contact with them. My mother seemed to understand this too, so she began urging me to let the matter go and promised to have a private talk with Claire. She emphasized that there was no need to inform my father about this issue right away. I questioned her decision, feeling that my father deserved to know the truth behind Claire's behavior since our grandparents were responsible. However, my mother insisted that involving my father could lead to unnecessary scolding for Claire, implying that I wasn't loving my sister enough. Reluctantly, I forgave Claire, trusting that my mother would handle the situation delicately. It's disheartening to say that despite my mother's efforts, the situation between us never improved. Claire's behavior toward me worsened over time. As she entered her teenage years, she became more cruel and hurtful. She mocked my appearance and weight, making me feel insecure about myself. Whenever I visited home from college, she would play cruel pranks on me and post them on social media, further humiliating me. What made it worse was her attitude toward my relationships. Whenever I introduced a boyfriend to my parents, Claire would try to flirt with them in front of me, even going as far as suggesting they could do better than me. This was not only disrespectful, but humiliating for me. Of course, I would complain to my mother, and my father would side with me, reminding Claire that she had no right to talk to me like that, but my mother often remained silent. I guess in her mind, she was still in denial about how deeply her parents had driven a wedge between Claire and me. Just 3 years ago, our grandparents invited everyone on an all-expenses-paid trip, but as expected, they conveniently excluded me. By then, I had learned to accept the exclusion, so it didn't bother me as much anymore. However, my father refused to go on the trip in protest. This decision upset both my mother and Claire. My mother, while understanding where my father was coming from, still tried to change his mind. Claire, on the other hand, had a heated argument with him, questioning why he would choose to withdraw from a family trip just because of me. She argued that I was an adult and didn't even want to go, which was ironic since I wasn't even invited. She tried to persuade him not to miss out on the trip because of me. Despite my mother's pleas, my father stood firm in his decision, refusing to go without me. After the trip, Claire posted a series of pictures with our cousins, captioning them with things like real family and partners for life. While it hurt to see my sister still viewed me as an outsider, I chose not to say anything to her. Over the years, I started going to therapy to heal and become more confident. This was also influenced by meeting the love of my life, Matt. He witnessed my sister's rudeness firsthand and encouraged me to stand up to her. Following his advice, I started talking to a therapist, where I discovered that the main reason I never argued or stood up to Claire was because, on some level, I felt guilty for not being our parents' biological child. The hurtful words from my grandparents during my childhood had somehow made me feel inferior and less deserving than Claire. As a result, I had let her walk all over me. However, as I began healing and understanding myself better, I gradually regained my self-worth and confidence. Nowadays, I no longer let Claire be rude to me. When we meet at dinners or family events, if she mutters a snide remark about me, I make sure to snap back at her. Initially, she was shocked to see me standing up for myself, but over time, she learned the hard way that I was no longer someone she could mess with. Now, she keeps her opinions to herself, no matter how much she might hate me. Unlike me, Claire doesn't have a good job, which is her biggest insecurity. She resents that I have higher degrees and a better-paying job. My financial stability allows me the freedom to travel wherever I want, while she still relies on our grandparents' support. Coming to the main event that led me to write on Reddit today, just a few months ago, I found out I was pregnant. It was incredible news for Matt and me since we had been trying for a while. When I called my parents to share the news, they were overjoyed and told me they couldn't wait to meet their future grandchild. Matt and I had been reading many parenting books to prepare, and were excited to care for our child. We also put a lot of effort into redecorating and turning a spare room in our house into a nursery for our little one. This week, my baby's shower was scheduled, and my cousins on my father's side were taking care of all the preparations. I was so excited to reunite with my family for such a joyous occasion and celebrate with them. Just 2 days ago, my mother called to drop a bombshell. My sister Claire is getting a divorce. I was completely baffled as I had no idea her marriage was in trouble. To me, Claire's husband, Cameron, always seemed like a nice guy. Even though I wasn't invited to their wedding, I always remained polite and friendly with Cameron whenever we met at family gatherings. It turns out Cameron caught Claire sleeping with a colleague in their home. This discovery led to a major confrontation between them, resulting in Cameron kicking her out of the house. Claire then had no choice but to move in with our parents. Understandably, my father was furious with Claire. He firmly told her that if she couldn't respect the sanctity of marriage, then she deserved to be divorced and live on her own. My mother, on the other hand, felt this was just a mistake that could be fixed through couples therapy for Cameron and Claire. However, Cameron stood his ground on the divorce and cut all contact with my sister. Facing this, my mother told me it would be best to cancel the baby shower scheduled for this week because Claire was too distraught to handle the event. I was stunned by her suggestion and gently reminded her that I had sent out invitations and made arrangements, so canceling wasn't an option at that point. My mother insisted that Claire was in a very vulnerable state, and seeing me celebrate my baby's upcoming birth might be too overwhelming for her. I reminded my mother that the world didn't revolve around Claire and that I was having a baby shower for my child. It had nothing to do with my sister or her circumstances. I firmly expressed that if she felt uncomfortable attending, she could stay home with my sister, but my event would go on as planned. Clearly, my mother wasn't happy with my decision and continued to argue, but I didn't back down. I was furious when I ended the call with her. It's so exhausting to see my mother constantly supporting and favoring Claire over me. I thought that after our disagreement, she would drop the issue or realize how wrong she was to suggest canceling my own baby shower. Today, I was eagerly looking forward to the baby shower. My mother was supposed to pick me up from home, but we hadn't talked much since our last argument, so I made arrangements to go to the venue with one of my cousins. However, I was very surprised when my mother suddenly showed up to pick me up. I felt it was a hopeful sign that she was finally showing support and that we could move past our dispute. Imagine my surprise when my mother solemnly walked into my place to announce that she had some news to share. Initially, I feared the worst and felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. However, she reassured me that it was nothing serious and helped me sit on the couch so we could talk. Then she informed me that since I had refused to cancel the baby shower, she had decided to cancel it on my behalf. I was stunned, blinking in disbelief as she explained that she believed she had saved me from potential embarrassment. Confused and frustrated, I asked her what on earth she was talking about. My mother continued, saying it wouldn't be good for me or the family to celebrate while my sister was preparing for a divorce. In her opinion, canceling a simple baby shower was a small sacrifice to support my sister during such a difficult time. I felt utterly betrayed and furious. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream at her for how she had violated my trust. However, being pregnant, I forced myself to restrain those impulses. I squeezed my eyes shut, counted to 10, and desperately tried to regain my composure. When I opened my eyes again, the frustration and pain were still there, but I firmly asked my mother to leave the house immediately. I couldn't bear to have her presence around me after such a betrayal. At that moment, it felt like she had not only ruined my celebration, but also ignored my feelings and autonomy as an adult and a future mother. Since she left in a huff, I've been an emotional wreck. It feels like my emotions are on an endless roller coaster, and the tears just won't stop. I've had to seek comfort from Matt, and he's on his way back after hearing what happened. I can't believe my mother did this to me. A part of me wants to expose the truth behind my sister's divorce, knowing that my mother is probably trying to cover it up. That might be why she canceled my baby shower so no one would ask about it. I'm struggling with what's right and justified, which is why I'm posting this. Update 1, thank you all for your feedback. I've read every part and want to clarify a few things. First, Claire is to blame for my baby shower being cancelled. My mother and sister have always been very close, so I'm sure my sister was the one who first came up with this idea. Additionally, on the day they cancelled my baby shower, Claire texted me, saying not to be so sensitive about my event and that I shouldn't be too harsh on our mother. She went on to say that she didn't want our mother to constantly answer questions about her divorce and that my family should understand this. She also asked me to keep her affair with her boss a secret. Second, my mother tried to call me several times afterward to continue persuading me and justifying her actions, but this time Matt wanted to talk to her. He started the conversation by telling her what he thought and made it clear that it was ridiculous for her to cancel my baby shower without my knowledge. He firmly stated that she would never see our child if she continued to blatantly disrespect me like this. My mother was shocked by this, but after what she did to me, I couldn't help but agree with my husband's decision. Finally, my father is not talking to my mother or my sister after finding out what they did. Since they canceled my baby shower, he and Matt have discussed and decided to throw a new one, which my mother and sister will not be invited to. I've also spoken to all my cousins, who reached out to see how I was doing after receiving my mother's message about canceling the baby shower. They all agreed that my mother had crossed the line and didn't want anything to do with her this time. Also, I've received some messages from people asking why I never told my father how our grandparents influenced Claire's negative views about me. Honestly, I trusted my mother to handle this issue with Claire. I didn't want to cause unnecessary conflict in the family. Sometimes, as children, we end up in situations where we choose to stay silent even if it's uncomfortable. As a child, I hoped my mother would stand up for me and protect me from her parents, but sadly, that never happened. Clearly, she favored her biological daughter over her adopted one. Moreover, as I mentioned, my confidence and world were impacted by the experiences I went through as a child. Update 2, today, I have a big update to share. I felt that since both my mother and Claire refused to acknowledge any fault in their actions, I needed to teach them a lesson that would stay with them for life. I took your advice and sat down to draft a detailed email to every family member, explaining why my sister is getting a divorce. I didn't hesitate to detail her affair with her boss and how she broke her husband's trust when he discovered them, but I didn't stop there. I also emphasized how my mother canceled my baby shower out of shame over my sister's life choices and not wanting to face anyone. I crafted the email meticulously, ensuring that every word would ignite the anger and frustration in them that they made me feel. I felt entirely justified in my actions as I pressed send on that email. It was my way of standing up for myself, letting everyone know the truth behind the facade my mother and sister were trying to maintain about our perfect family. As you can imagine, my mother and sister reacted exactly as I predicted. They started calling me in a rage, leaving me voicemails filled with accusations. Consciously, I chose not to answer, letting their calls go to voicemail so I could listen to them later. My mother kept texting me, begging me to send another email retracting my words, and emphasizing that I shouldn't shame my poor sister, but I ignored her. I'm sure both of them are getting calls from the whole family now, trying to verify the details in my email. I have no regrets about what I did. I'm certain my mother will think twice before interfering in my life again. Surprisingly, that's not all. My grandparents also tried to contact me. They must have read my email and are clearly upset about me exposing my sister. Despite their efforts to reach out, I ignored their calls for my peace of mind. I'm sure they're even angrier now, which only pleases me more. Update 3, since many of you wanted another update on my situation, here it is. I finally had my baby shower, and it was grand. My cousins and close family friends came together to give me the most wonderful experience. Thanks to my father and Matt, the decorations were perfect, the food was delicious, and the atmosphere was filled with joy and excitement. It was a day full of love and positivity, and I couldn't be more grateful to those who made it happen. As for my mother and Claire, they're having a rough time. My father has reached his limit with Claire's behavior after she came home drunk from a date with her boss. To clarify, the guy she cheated with is married and has kids, so it's obviously very wrong. When my father saw her condition, he finally had enough and told her to leave the house. He felt it was time for her to take responsibility and start living independently. Since she had never lived alone in her life, Claire had attended college in our city to continue living at home, and after graduation she moved straight in with her ex-husband Cameron. My father was right to kick her out. My mother initially objected to his decision, but eventually relented when he told her she could leave with Claire if she wanted. I don't know if Claire is now living in her apartment or couch surfing with friends, but I'm glad she never called me for help. I know many of you were worried about the impact my mother's actions would have on my parents' marriage. Despite everything, I don't think they'll get divorced. They've been together for so long, and despite the challenges they face, they seem committed to staying together. While my mother's actions may have strained our relationship, I still value their marriage and hope they can find a way to resolve their differences. It's disappointing that neither my mother nor Claire has apologized. Though my mother has tried to contact me several times, her messages only talk about how hurt she is, never acknowledging how much she hurt me. It seems she still doesn't fully grasp the impact of her actions. What really bothers me is that she could have addressed these issues between me and my sister long ago when we were young, but she deliberately ignored the warning signs, and now it's too late for us. Our family is fractured now, and I blame her for that. I plan to cut off contact with my sister and mother permanently because I don't want my child to be surrounded by negativity or hatred. As for Matt and me, we're doing great. He's a wonderful partner and always takes care of me. This might be my final update on this issue because I want to move on and focus on enjoying the last weeks of my pregnancy. Update 4. This update comes after the birth of my baby, who, by the way, is a healthy girl, so I'm thrilled. Also, Matt has been my rock, especially with everything that has happened in the family or what's left of it. I don't know where to start, but I'll try my best to explain everything so you understand what's happened over the past few months. The last thing I mentioned was that my father was very angry with my mother and sister for their favoritism over the years. Well, now it's my parents who are getting a divorce, or rather, it was my father who decided. My mother is still fighting to prevent it from happening. This started a few months ago, shortly after my father kicked Claire out of the house. One day, Claire returned to talk to my father because she had nowhere to stay in the city and wanted to convince him to take her back. My father refused again, saying he couldn't keep indulging a spoiled brat like her because what a good father should have done was raise her better. And that's when Claire dropped the bomb. She said that he wasn't her father anyway. She regretted it the moment she said it, but my father forced her to explain what she meant. She quickly left the house, and my father started calling her, leaving her hundreds of messages because he wanted an explanation. Then my mother came home from shopping, and he demanded an explanation from her too. When he saw my mother's frightened expression, he knew exactly what was happening, so he packed his bags and came to live with us for a while. Thankfully, we have a big house, so there was room for my father. Eventually, everything came to light through a paternity test, where my father painfully discovered that Claire was not his daughter. My mother suspected it and had told Claire because they were so close. Apparently, she had an affair with someone, and that led to her pregnancy. The chances of my father being the biological father were slim because they had been trying for so long. But my mother saw that she was finally going to have a child and decided to keep everything quiet. She's been trying to convince my father to go to couples therapy and that the mistake can easily be fixed, but my father completely rejected it and filed for divorce a few days later. That's when the family split. One side is my mother's family, the other is my father's. It's not hard to know which side I'm on. I haven't spoken to Claire or my mother because they're both blocked, but I did exchange a few words when my mother came to the house to talk to my father, though it was more like asking her to leave. Anyway, my father has finally gotten back on his feet and asked not to pay anything in the divorce because we're in a state where infidelity is important in the divorce process. On the other hand, I know Claire has moved in with my mother, so all of this worked out quite well for her because she got what she wanted. She hasn't even bothered to contact my father to see how he's doing or anything, more evidence that she truly is my mother's biological daughter, because she can only think about herself. Update 5. This update is to let you know that my parents' divorce is finalized, and my mother had to sell her house. She was ordered to split the assets in half, so my mother had to sell to pay my father his share. As for my father, he didn't have to pay anything to my mother, because although she didn't work, and he was the only one doing so, infidelity played in his favor. So what I know is that my mother and sister are living together on the money from the house sale and Claire's salary, though that won't last long, but that's all I know, because the two families barely speak to each other after everything that happened.